Welcome everyone, Questine here with a discussion about some of the most fun races to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. At number 5 we have the Dark Elves. Now with the Dark Elves I have to wonder how much the impression of the community is determined by many people coming from Warhammer 2, including many prominent YouTubers, talking about how the Dark Elves sucked in Warhammer 3 compared to Warhammer 2. And while certainly their economy was nerfed in a significant fashion, the Dark Elves still are one of the most powerful races in the game, with a good army roster, good hero options, good legendary lords, good lord options, good economy in every way that counts. If we look at the Dark Elf economy, as long as you maintain, let's say, 60 slaves per economic building, you can get up to 700 income at tier 3. This is the difference between a good race and a bad race. Like 700 income. And even if you don't have 100 slaves, which is honestly pushing it quite far, like not having 100 slaves, okay, you need to have 100 slaves, then you need to account for the slave decline. But as long as you fight a battle or a couple of battles every turn, if we're talking about the late game, you will have enough slaves to keep your economy going. That isn't really going to be an issue. So you're looking at 700 income. Now imagine a situation like this. This is a 4-region province. The amount of money that I'm going to generate in this particular province, especially with the Catacombs of Quintex going into the Sanctum of Quintex, is going to be pretty damn absurd. It is ridiculous. Like what, 3,000? And that's just from the economic buildings themselves. We're getting the main settlement buildings, so what, 4,000 plus income just from this province, maybe even more, because the Dark Elves can also get the Dark Elves also have a building that generates the income from all buildings that they can get at tier 3. So Dark Elves have an amazing economy, but they do need slaves to power it. That's the downside. But it's like, okay, so they're a race that has to be very aggressive and conquer a lot of territory very quickly. They don't necessarily need to hold a lot of territory, but you can certainly play the slaver pirates that they're supposed to be in the lore, because that's what the Dark Elves do. Furthermore, beyond their just a regular economy, here's the thing about the Dark Elves. They also earn a pretty damn good amount of post-battle loot. Now, it depends on the casualties you're doing and all that kind of stuff, but the Dark Elf post-battle loot is pretty damn good. Now, I'm using a mod for Auto-Resolve. This actually is one of the few cases where the Auto-Resolve mod doesn't work well in my favor. But if I lower this to easy, I should be able to win. Okay. And when you look at the situation, like 550 over here, right, for sacking, and this is just like a tier 1 settlement. If I get to higher level settlements, if I get research, if I get skills, I am going to start really getting a ridiculous sum of money through post-battle. Like you have a research that you need to get, battle is business, that gives you 10%. Post-battle loot. Then you have research that gives you 20% income from sacking settlements. And on top of that, you have a right that gives you 50% income from post-battle loot. If you're playing as low-tier, that's even more ridiculous. So the Dark Elves are an incredibly powerful race in terms of their post-battle loot and in terms of their overall economy. And on top of that, they have pretty damn good units early on. I mean, Dark Shards aren't necessarily the best range units, but they will certainly get the job done. And you can recruit them from a tier 1 barracks. From a tier 2 barracks, you get Silver Shield crossbowmen. Not the best range in the world, but they can take a hit. But really, the units you want to get are from the Black Ark, because every Black Ark will give you the ability of recruiting Black Ark Corsairs and Corsairs with handbows. And the thing about Corsairs is that they're heavily armored units with good leadership, so they're going to do pretty damn well in Auto-Resolve as well. And you have a great deal of replenishment in a campaign through post-battle options, through death hags. There's a lot of potential in the Dark Elf campaign. So good economy, good unit roster, especially early on, and certainly a playstyle that suits Warhammer 3 very well. And that's what's really fun about them. Like, Dark Elves are built around early game aggression. That's how you play a Dark Elf campaign. They're really well suited to that. They can increase their hero capacity very easy. Like you can get Masters +1 at the tier 2 holds a mustering. You can get Sorceresses at tier 3. You can get Death Hags and even Canite Assassins. Not if you're playing Morathi, that's a bit of a different discussion. But you can increase hero capacity pretty damn easily. Your Lords are good. Your Legendary Lords are good. Like, there's a lot of things to like about the Dark Elves. Like, I understand why people that played a lot of Warhammer 2 are not particularly pleased about how the Dark Elves are in Warhammer 3, but they're still one of the best races in the game. At number 4, we have the High Elves, which are in a lot of ways opposite to the Dark Elves. They're still pretty solid in the early game, but not quite as insane in terms of the benefits of early game aggression. The High Elves, however, are more of a builder race, or a growing race, in the sense that they get stronger the more you play their campaign. So they're one of the best races, if not the best race, when it comes to a very, very long campaign in Total War Warhammer 3. That's because their main economic building is going to produce quite a bit more income if you do get to 100 control. And you actually have 2 economic buildings with the Promenade as well, which also generates more income if you have higher level of control, and it generates control. Then you do have the Elven Embassy, which increases your income from trade tariffs. And that's important because you're going to get a lot of trading partners because you produce trade resources through the Elven Trinket. So you're capable of producing a lot of money in a campaign through trade. Now, engaging with AI is always going to have its own drawbacks, but the amount of income that you're going to generate from trade is absolutely ridiculous. Like half your income in a campaign might be generated from trade alone, if not more, in a High Elven campaign between trade resources and trade tariffs. So there is certainly a lot of potential in a High Elven campaign in terms of the late game economy. Though the early game economy, while certainly not the strongest in the world, is still decent enough. Though it is in a troubled spot if you don't have any trading partners whatsoever. Now, on top of that, they do have some pretty good hero choices, though they do require usually tier 4 as opposed to tier 3 in order to increase their capacity. That's what I mean, that they're not as good in the early game as the Dark Elves are. So they're going to have fewer heroes, but their armies are relatively cheap and pretty damn effective. Between spearmen and archers, you have pretty effective early game armies. And dependent on the legendary lord you're playing, you might have some unique units, like a Lefanar with Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors accessible from the very beginning of your campaign, Alfarian with his Mistwalkers, or Alariel with her Tree Spirit units. So there's certainly a great deal of variety in the High Elven campaigns that make a lot of those campaigns fairly unique and interesting. Like Lefanar is much better in the early game because he can make a lot of money for the assassination missions he has, whereas Alariel is much better in the late game. And Alfarian, Emeric do have their own interesting campaign. Or if you just want to play a vanilla High Elven Legendary Lord, you of course do have the option of going with Tyrion. So those are all options that do work pretty well during the course of a campaign. They are effective. They are pretty fun to play. Like their playstyle in terms of army can be pretty simple, considered pretty simple early on, but it is a playstyle that does work. If there's any particular annoyance in a High Elven campaign, like for Dark Elves, it's the slave system, of course, that can be annoying because you really need to push that aggression to the max when you have a massive empire to not end up without slaves. For the High Elves, it's the research tree that's really annoying because it requires various buildings and resources to unlock things. Like you need the tier 4 settlement to get cultural advancements, for instance, or you need to get you need to get an elf. Well, you need an elven court and a shrine of Asuryan, so that can be pretty damn annoying to actually get access to both of them, especially because the Shrine of Asuryan is a pointless building, or you need various combinations of building to get access to the research, though the research can be pretty powerful in its own right. Now at number 3, we of course have the Greenskins. The Greenskins are such a great race to play. Like the Dark Elves, they're really good in early game aggression, though they're even more insane, because at least the Dark Elves can trade, the Greenskins cannot, so their economy is really heavily based on the idea of looting and sacking, post-battle loot, and their main economic structure generates 250 income, just straight up, going all the way up to 500. But the Greenskins make a lot of their money through sacking and looting settlements. It is absurd how much money you can make in any Greenskins campaign, especially because you get a bunch of ancillaries over here that increase the amount of post-battle loot and sacking loot that you will get in every single battle in the campaign. Furthermore, the Greenskins have a great selection of heroes in their campaign. For most of them, the capacity for them can be increased at tier 3, be it shamans, be it hags and Black Orc big bosses. The only exception are the Goblin big bosses, but that's not really too big of an issue. And they also have a really good and versatile unit roster, from infantry to range units. Not so great in terms of artillery, but they do have monster units to compensate, specifically the trolls and stone trolls. And then, of course, the rogue idols available in the campaign. They also have some pretty solid chariots over here with the snarling pump wagons that they can get access to. And the artillery, while certainly not the best in the game, will be able to get the job done in their primary role in siege battle. So lots of options in a Greenskin campaign, lots of possibilities, a great and aggressive race that really dominates a lot of the early game for every legendary lord we're talking about over here in the game. Like, if you've gone up against the Greenskin legendary lord on legendary difficulty, you will feel it. It is an absurd level of challenge early on. Now, the AI doesn't necessarily have the best staying power, but you do as the player. So the Greenskins can be great in a short campaign, but it can also be great in a long campaign as well, just because of the versatility of their roster, good research as well. Yeah, lots of fun to be had when playing a Greenskin campaign. Now, at number 2, we of course have the Chaos Dwarves. The Chaos Dwarves are a fantastically designed race that actually makes a lot of their campaigns very, very interesting, between the resource system, the labor system that they have to deal with, as well as just the way their campaigns do work in general. They have some fairly solid hero options, good artillery, good infantry, good monster units. They have a lot of things to like in their campaign in terms of their unit roster. Their economy is also pretty powerful, though it's not based just on money. You only really use money for certain structures and, of course, to recruit units. But you're really heavily dependent on raw material and armaments in the campaign and conclave influence. Basically, what that really means is you're dependent on labor. You also have to deal with an endgame crisis in every single Chaos Dwarf campaign from turn 1 in the form of Grimgor Ironhide. Maybe you do get lucky in a Chaos Dwarf campaign and you don't have to face Grimgor because he ends up at war with some other faction and they weaken him sufficiently that he's not necessarily going to be a major issue. But that is actually a pretty rare occurrence. Most of the time, if you're playing a Chaos Dwarf campaign, you're going to have to deal with Grimgor. And dealing with Grimgor, while certainly difficult, is actually a fairly fun experience to deal with during the course of a campaign. And for real though, they actually have nuclear weapons as well through the Mega Mortar, as well as various other army abilities through the Tower of Tsar. And not just the Tower of Tsar, to be very, very clear on that. It's not just through the Tower of Tsar that they have some really powerful army abilities, but overall it is a pretty potent campaign for the Chaos Dwarves, and it's a lot of fun. Like, I think Great Assembly with the Chaos Dwarves have set a new standard for DLC going forward. Now, plenty of people were like, oh, it sucks we don't have geographic variety, it sucks we don't have 4 legendary lords. I don't think quantity beats quality, and I think the quality of the Chaos Dwarf campaigns really shows itself. Really fun campaigns, well-designed race, and we'll see what Great Assembly does with future DLCs now that they've released something as good as the Chaos Dwarfs. The price, though, of course, is certainly very high for them. And finally, at number 1, it is, of course, the Skaven. The Skaven is a race that has received a lot of love and care, attention from Creative Assembly throughout the years, ever since they were introduced in Warhammer 2. Their initial introduction in Warhammer 2 wasn't necessarily the best, but ever since then, with all of the DLCs they've gotten, they've ended up in a really, really good place. Now, this is the kind of race where you certainly do want to own all of the DLCs for them to have the best experience, but damn, do Skaven have a lot. Their food mechanic allows them to take settlements at a tier 5 level if you so desire. Their economy, the way it functions, it's based around getting a bunch of buildings that don't generate a lot of income individually, but once you get all of those and get the Warpstone reactor building, you are going to generate a substantial amount of income. Like, this is my starting province. I'm generating 2.6k, and this isn't even the final level. Like, once I get every settlement over here to a higher level, once I get to all the structures, I might be looking at generating over 4k income from the Forest of the Moon. So Skaven have a good economy. They have a great unit roster. Yes, clan rats aren't necessarily the best, but You do get chieftains, which are pretty damn good. Storm Vermin can hold the line, but it's not the infantry line that you want to get as Skaven, at least not through the clan armory. There are much better choices available, be it Eshin Triads if you want them, or Warp Grinders and Flamethrowers if you want to get access to those kind of units. There's a lot of power. There's a great hero variety. There's so many different playstyles that you can use as Skaven. Like you can go full-on monster with Rat Ogres and Mutant Rat Ogres, Brute Horrors, Hellpit Abominations. You can go heavy on the artillery, including the weapon teams. Whether or not you count the weapon teams, like the Poison Mortars and the Deathglow Bombardiers as artillery units, it is a discussion to be had, but overall, like, Skaven are just in an amazing place in terms of their unit roster, in terms of their faction design, in terms of their campaign power. They're certainly a race that benefits a lot from aggression, and they may have issues in terms of empire building, but they have tools for that, like the undercity mechanic that they do have access to during the course of their campaign. So Skaven are in an amazing place in a lot of different ways in their campaigns. It's just some of the campaigns have issues because of the starting position, but really only two have major issues because of the starting position. It says a lot that you might have a pathetic legendary lord like Tretch Craventail, and he can still have a pretty fun and entertaining campaign just because he's a Skaven legendary lord. And that's not something you can say for many other races in the game. I mean, Warriors of Chaos, you know, you could throw in some of the worst legendary lords in the game as a Warriors Castle legendary lord. It could still work, but like just Skaven in general have a really fun playstyle with a lot of versatility available to them in terms of their lords, in terms of their heroes, legendary lords. They can handle all kinds of terrain on the campaign map. They have a great deal of versatility when it comes to terrain, with only a couple of terrain types not being useful. The most important of these is actually just Ulf 1, but outside of that, they can pretty much sell across the entire world, or a very substantial portion of the world, dependent on which legendary lord you're talking about, of course. So great versatility in their campaign, great unit roster, just everything you need to make or for really fun campaigns. And this is one of the races that I keep coming back to again and again and again. The only downside is that their auto-resolve, dependent on the units you're using, their auto-resolve is not necessarily going to be the best. Or you could just get a bunch of Rattling Gunners, Jezzails, Warp Grinders, and Flamethrowers, and there's your auto-resolve problem resolved. Anyway, Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And if you do enjoy my content, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon.